trees, singing strange melodies, and they made that the start of the blues. And from a jail came the wail of a downhearted frail, and they played that as part of the blues. From a whippoorwill out on a hill, they found a new note, pushed it through a horn till it was worn into a blue note. And then they nursed it and rehearsed it and gave out the news that the Southland gave birth to the blues. From a whippoorwill out on a hill, they took a new note, pushed it through a horn till it was worn into a blue note. And then they nursed it and rehearsed it and gave out the news that the Southland gave birth to the blues. Oh, the Southland gave birth to the blues.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here playing for a younger audience. Well, I think we're probably fourth age, so yes, great to be here. And thanks very much to Peter Holcock and to Sheila for all the help they've given us in advance of this gig. Now, you probably recognise what we just played, or what I played at the very beginning, as the cadenza from Rhapsody in Blue. What you may or may not know is that Gershwin didn't actually write that. It was actually written by Paul Whiteman's clarinetist, George Grizich. And it was written as a joke at the dress rehearsal. And Gershwin liked it so much, he said, keep it in and wail as much as possible. Now, present at that first performance, which was actually in 1924 in New York, was Fritz Kreisler, the violin player, Leopold Stokowski, Willie the Lion Smith, the fabulous piano player who fought in the trenches in the First World War, Philip de Sousa, who wrote those wonderful marches, and I leave this chap till last, Stravinsky. Stravinsky was a great jazz fan. He wrote the Ebony Clarinet Concerto, of course, for Woody Herman, and he also wrote some other pieces as well. Now, he liked jazz, and what he didn't know was that Charlie Parker was a great fan of Stravinsky's music. And I get quite emotional when I relate this, because Stravinsky went to hear Charlie Parker play in New York in 1951, actually, and they didn't acknowledge each other. But at the end of the second tune, Charlie Parker in his solo, started playing quotes from Stravinsky's Firebird. Stravinsky just burst out laughing, and that sort of broke the ice. Gershwin played piano in that performance, and he also improvised. Okay, now the glissando and portamento that starts off that actually goes right back to the cotton fields, to the idea of call and response. And Gershwin, of course, had a strong association with the blues, because that structure led to the creation of the blues. And as we know, he wrote Porky and Bess. And now, before we go on to the next part of our thing, I'd like to just say a couple of other words about these wonderful musicians and friends of mine. Tony's a virgin. No, sorry, that's a vegan. Oh, that's a vegan. Sorry.
He's
I always get
vegan
that wrong.
virgin, actually.
Yeah, vegan virgin. I went to the Virgin Isles the other day, and I was very surprised to find that there were no virgins there. So the next year I went to the Canary Isles, and to my surprise, there were no virgins there either. So that's Tony. On On bass we have John Healy, as you heard. John has piles. That's piles of talent. And he's also, of course, our vocalist. Now, after working in the cotton fields, the slaves, of course, were meant to go to, they actually provided the music for the dance on Saturday night. We will talk about that later. They were also made to go to church on, are we getting the slides? Yes, we are. Great, that's good. They were also made to go to church on a Sunday. And this is, of course, they were exposed then to the gospel tradition, to the evangelical tradition. Now, this is very interesting. I only discovered this comparatively recently because there's a wonderful example of what we call linguistic dissonance. Because they used to sing, you see, and they used to do their cries. But "Steal Away to Jesus" was actually an invitation for the slaves to get together. Okay, not just a superficial meaning. Judgment Day wasn't, the thing in the end of the Bible. It was the day of the slave uprising when they would rise up and overthrow their masters. Home, Canaan and heaven and the promised land wasn't what self-explanatory terms. It was actually either Africa, where their ancestors or their parents or themselves had come from, or it was possibly the north of America, where, of course, we know there was no slavery. So what we're going to do now is we're going to play one of those spirituals, and John is going to sing "Just a Closer Walk with Thee." I do the first one, is that right? Okay.
I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk. Let me walk close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Oh, granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Oh, let it be. Dear Lord, oh, let it be. I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk. Let me walk close to thee. Hey, just a closer walk with thee. Oh, granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Oh, let it be, dear Lord, oh, let it be.
That's John Healy on vocals. Well, Peter's taken most of my thunder away, but with his very fine introductory speech, I was just going to say a few words about music, language, and communication. It's interesting that in traditional language and music, we actually use some of the same terminology. We talk about phrases in both forms, and we also talk about voices. Again, in terms of communication, both music and language have been analysed using Saussure's terms of reference, that syntagmatic and pragmatic axes. I won't sort of bore you with that. But poetry, with its meter, its metrical sort of feature, has a very strong sense of rhythm. And of course that buys into music's strongest component. That's what the research tells us. And of course we know that drums are a very powerful form of communication. Immediately that springs to mind is the Native Americans, the Indians. And of course in Congo Square in New Orleans on Sunday mornings, the African American slaves got together and evoked the gods. And of course, again, as Peter said, music is a very strong way of evoking emotion. A big part of New Orleans, of course, culture is the street parades. I was lucky enough to go with a jazz band to the Creole festival one Christmas, but the Mardi Gras is the big one, and the street parades are fantastic. The floats are a big part of that. John Healy, before the pandemic, used to go there every year, actually. I just want to tell you a brief anecdote about are there any trombone players here? The origin in Dixieland, there's a style of playing which is called tailgate trombone. And where this comes from is one day on the back of the float, the trombone player went like this with his slide, and he knocked another musician off the back of the truck. We hope it was a banjo player, but you can't win them all. And so after that, they made the trombone player sit on, in America, what is known the tailgate of the truck. So that slurping sound of jazz playing has always now been known as tailgate trombone. We're now going to play Bourbon Street, as of course an important street in New Orleans. A street march, we'll play that for you now.
Let's fly down or drive down to New Orleans. That city, so pretty, with all its scenes. I'll take you and parade you down on Bourbon Street. We'll see all the hot spots, we'll meet all those big shots way down on Bourbon Street. Let's fly down or drive down to New Orleans. That city, so pretty. Let me show you what it means. I'll take you and parade you down on Bourbon Street. We'll see all the hot spots, we'll meet all those big shots way down on Bourbon Street.
Thank you very much. That was Bourbon Street Parade. Now, we've been talking about New Orleans, of course known as the cradle of jazz. jazz was also played in the brothels, mainly by piano players. And of course, Storyville area was no. There was a band, as I think Nigel played in the band, the Storyville Jazzmen here in Perth. The Basin Street, where most of the brothels used to go all the way through the middle of New Orleans. Now there's only a little bit left at the top end of the north end, and it's quite dangerous up there. The best known brothel was Mahogany Hall, and I was lucky enough to catch the Dukes of Dixieland playing there once, a very fine jazz band. Now, it's interesting to wonder what the origin of the word jazz was. There is a French sort of, not argot to argot slang, word jaser in French, which means to chat. It's a nice explanation because in many ways jazz is an informal jazz conversation. You probably noticed that this afternoon. But it's more likely that the origin of jazz was jasmine oil. Jazz was taken from jasmine oil, which was used in the brothels. Now, naughty people used to actually cross out the J, and of course it became arse. And so they changed it to jazz with 2 Zs. And I'm glad they did that, because one of my original bands would have been called the Windy City Arseman. And that's not necessarily a good name for a band. Well, we're going to play, those piano players, by the way, they used to play at the piano, then they used to fall asleep and start playing again, sort of 2 or 3 hours later to make a living. That's how hard it was. We're going to play Basin Street Blues, and again, what you may not know is that the introduction, bum, ba-dum, 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 bum, actually wasn't part of the original tune. It was actually written by Jack Teagarden and Glenn Miller on a recording session. So here we go with the Basin Street Blues.
Oh, won't you come along with me? Way down the Mississippi. We'll take a trip to the land of dreams. Steam down the river down to New Orleans. Oh, the band's there to meet us. There'll be old friends to greet us. Where all the dark and the light folks meet. Heaven on earth, they call it Basin Street. Basin Street is the street where the light and dark folks meet. Down in New Orleans, the land of dreams. You'll never know how nice it seems or just how much it really means. Glad to be, yes sirree, where welcome's free and dear to me, where I can lose my Basin Street blues. Oh, won't you come along with me? Way down the Mississippi. We'll take a trip to the land of dreams. Steam down the river down to New Orleans.
Okay, folks, well, another very important aspect of jazz in the early days was, of course, a 2-time ragtime dance called the cakewalk. And as you probably know, that the the exponent, the best exponent of this music, was of course Scott Joplin. Actually wanted to be a composer of opera. That's what he wanted to be. And in fact, because he became so well known with his cakewalks and other tunes like The Entertainer, he actually, after he died, poor bugger, they played some of his operas. Sad, isn't it? Yes. So the reason the cakewalk got its name is because the slaves, as I said, provided the music on a Saturday night, and they had a competition. What they used to do is they used to imitate their French masters, poncing around. They were mainly French. And in fact, the closest brothel to the centre of New Orleans, which I've been to, was owned by Napoleon's brother. And there's a painting of Napoleon there in that particular plantation. And so because they had no money, when they had the competition, taking the mickey out of their masters, the prize was a cake. They baked a cake, and that's where the term comes from. So as I've mentioned The Entertainer, I think it's only fair that we should feature Tony on piano and play The Entertainer. Hold on, Tony. Here we go. Well, thank you very much. Now, staying in New Orleans, in 1917, the original Dixieland Jazz Band, the OEJB, made the very first jazz record. And, of course, it was a white band, and the African Americans were not pleased. However, it is true, factually true, that the first opportunity to make that record was offered to Freddie Kephart. But he was paranoid, and he thought, if I make a record, everybody will pinch my music. In fact, wrong. And he was so paranoid that he actually, when he played the trumpet, he used to have a handkerchief over his, so that nobody could copy his finger patterns. He also wanted a once-off fee instead of getting a percentage, which would have been fantastic. Because I happened to meet Ruth LaRocca in New Orleans about 25 years ago. And she told me that actually she was still getting the royalties for Tiger Rag. It's sad to relate that Freddie Kephart died in Chicago in poverty. Very, very, very sad. Well, as I say, I met Ruth LaRocca. She was amazed that an Australian knew who she was. She was 30 years younger than Nick, of course, so that's why she was still alive. She was amazed that an Australian knew who she was and could actually play Tiger Rag. In fact, so amazed, she took me back to her house and showed me the tiger skin on her bed. Don't get the wrong idea. No, that's true. And I think I saw the original cornet that record was made on, and I told a friend of mine at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, get your backside down there and get hold of that trumpet, that cornet actually. Yeah. Now, you may or may not know, it's rather strange, you probably know this, there are no tigers in New Orleans. So why was there a tune called Tiger Rag? Well, actually, my research reveals that it's a hand in cards. It's a hand that when you're playing poker, It's a 7 high, deuce low, a pair, a straight flush, and it takes a lot of courage to hold on to that hand and win. Hence the phrase, hold that tiger. And of course the piano player as well as the trom player would make that that noise on the piano to simulate the noise of the tiger. Okay, well we're not actually going to play Tiger Right today, but I've been asked to tell a couple of anecdotes, so I'm going to tell 3. In terms of communication, you may or may not know that Freud in 1905 wrote a book called Jokes and Their Relation to the Unconscious. And what he said is that jokes allow us to overcome inhibitions, like jazz musicians, and the enjoyment of the joke indicates what is being repressed in more serious talk. So here's some unserious talk. I'd like to tell you an anecdote of an ancestor of mine, Sir John Coulthrope, who in 1143 decided to go to the Second Crusade. And he said to his darling wife Penelope, I'm sorry, darling, I'm going to have to put you in this awful metal chastity belt. He said, I hope I won't be too long, and I'll give the key to our good friend, Sir Percival Lancer Little. He was no relation of Lancelot, of course. So he did all this, and he said, look, Percy, if I'm not back in 4 years, life must go on. So he set off into the sunset, which if you think about it, the silly bugger was going the wrong way. Because, yes, you got that, yes. Anyway, he hadn't gone very far, and he heard hoofbeats. Then he turned round and he said, good God, it's Sir Percival, what's the problem? And he said, Sir John, you've given me the wrong key. Okay, well, let's keep going. Oh, there's a blank page. And what we're going to do now, in the 1920s, everything changed. The brothels in Storyville were closed on November 1917. Yeah, what a shame. Because there were a lot of military bases there, and there was an edict saying that there couldn't be naval bases within so many miles of the brothels. The high-class brothels, actually, I happen to know, not from personal experience, moved to a different location. But what really happened to cripple the economy was the boll weevil happened to the cotton crop for 3 rows in a year, and of course this had a devastating effect on the economy. This is known as the Great Migration, and a lot of the jazz musicians moved to Chicago. Louis Armstrong had already gone to Chicago to play second cornet, of course, with King Oliver. We're now talking about, yes, it's up there, the Jazz Age, and this was the time of speakeasies, Prohibition, the Great Gatsby, and of course Al Capone. I knew a musician who had done his first gig in a speakeasy in Chicago, and he was very nervous, and he was standing there, and a little bald man came up to him and said, son, you look very nervous. And he said, oh yeah, I think this club is owned by Al Capone. And this guy said, well, I'm Al Capone, and nobody's going to hurt you unless I tell them to. Yeah, would have made you nervous, wouldn't it? Anyway, Benny Goodman was doing his first gigs, wearing short trousers. George and Ira Gershwin were writing those wonderful tunes that became part of the Great American Songbook. And the Flappers were dancing. You can dance if you like. The most popular tune at that time, of course, was the Charleston, and we'll play the Charleston for you. Okay. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Another quick anecdote is a lady went to the chemist and she said, "I'd like to buy some arsenic." The chemist said, "I can't sell you on arsenic, that's illegal. Why do you want to buy some arsenic?" And she said, "I want to poison my husband." She said, he said, "You can't do that, that's murder. Why do you want to murder your husband?" And she said, "He's having an affair with your wife." And the chemist said, "Sorry, I didn't realise you had a prescription." Well, I'm going to have we'll keep that one in. I'm going to have a little rest. And John and Tony are now going to play a lovely song from the Great American Songbook called "I'm Going to Sit Right Down and Write Myself a Letter."
I'm going to sit right down and write myself a letter and make believe that it came from you. I'm gonna write words so sweet they're gonna knock me off of my feet. A lot of kisses on the bottom, you'll be glad you've got 'em. Gonna smile and say, I hope you're feeling better, and close with love the way that you do. Gonna sit right down, write myself a letter, and make believe that it came from you. Gonna sit right down and write myself a letter and make believe that it came from you. I'm gonna write words so sweet they're gonna knock me off of my feet. A lot of kisses on the bottom, I'll be glad I've got 'em. I'm gonna smile and say I hope you're feeling better, and close with love the way that you do. Gonna sit right down, write myself a letter, oh yeah, and make believe it came. Oh, make believe that it came. Make believe that it came from you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, of course, we're going through this very quickly, and we do have a second show which picks up on Louis Armstrong and Sidney Bechet, who, of course, were great figures in this early jazz sort of story. Now, the next period we're going to talk about is the swing era, 1931 to 1944, approximately. In 1932, of course, there was this Great Depression, but it was also the time of cinema and radio. And the big thing that made the music popular was, in fact, ballroom dancing, because it became widespread. And this is the first and only time, possibly apart from the jazz revival of Dixieland music in England, when jazz actually was popular music. But it was ballroom dancing. Radio was important because the big bands would play on the East Coast, and it would be broadcast down to San Francisco and Los Angeles. And it made them very popular when they toured. Okay, the music, it also meant that with the big bands, the music was written down for the first time. A lot of the tunes were riff tunes, a short phrase that was repeated over and over, like Sea Jam Blues. It was also a call and response format. And so it was popular music. And that's the music I started playing before, when I was still at school. In fact, until rock and roll came along, there was no such thing as a teenager. I wasn't a teenager, but my brother was a teenager. My first ambition actually was to have a suede waistcoat. How pathetic is that? Okay, so one of the big band leaders of that time was Benny Goodman. There he is. I was privileged to hear him in 1972. He was about my age at the Royal Albert Hall, and at the end of the concert he stood in tears. So I'm going to play one of his tunes. It was used in the film when his father died. He played a great tune called Memories of You. Well, Benny McGoodwin was known as the king of swing, but Artie Shaw was known as the king of the clarinet. And he had all these big bands had small bands, and they used to go into the recording studios in New York particularly and do small band recordings. And Artie Shaw had a band called the Grey Mercy Five. And one of his best-known tunes was My Blue Heaven. Of course, he was married to Lana Turner and Ava Gardner, and I won't go into the story about why he gave up music, but he actually gave it up because somebody asked him what it was like living with Lana Turner in the urinal one day, and he said, "That's it, I don't want to be famous anymore." That's roughly the tune. So here's Artie Shaw's My Blue Heaven.
where whippoorwills call and evening is nigh, we'll hurry to mine. Oh, my blue heaven. I turn to the right, a little white light will take you to my blue heaven. You'll see a smiling face in a fireplace, a cozy room, a little nest that nestles where the roses bloom. Just Molly and me, baby, make sweet. We're happy in mine. Oh, my blue heaven.
That's actually what Artie Short played. It's a good example of plagiarism, but actually plagiarism in jazz actually doesn't seem to matter all that much. Okay, so it would be a shame to talk about the swing era without talking about the African American bands. Of course, Count Basie, still well known, privileged to actually hear the band twice and book it once. And it's true. And the other big band, of course, was Duke Ellington. And we're going to play Take the A Train. It's just interesting to think how this particular tune got the name. But Billy Strayhorn was going up to New York to meet with Duke Ellington when they wrote this tune, and he said to Duke Ellington, "How do I get there?" And he said, "Take the A Train." And that's how the tune got the name. I'm going to tell that joke after a moment. You're probably looking at this saxophone wondering whether I'm going to play it. I'm going to play the saxophone on Take the A Train. Just give us a chance, Tony. Hold on. I don't know if it still works. Probably near enough for jazz, as they say. Yeah, okay. Well, thank you. You'll be relieved to hear I'm now going to tell my last anecdote. A friend of mine was at the airport, and he was in the lounge, and he was talking to this attractive-looking woman, and he had a drink. He said, "May I buy you a drink?" She said, "Yes." They got chatting, and he said, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" And she said, "Well, actually," she said, "you may not believe this, but I'm the president of the International Nymphomaniacs Association." I thought that'd get a laugh. And then he said, "Well, what are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm flying around the world trying to find out who the best male lovers are." And he said, "Oh, is any of the research come in?" And she said, "As a matter of fact, it has." He said, "Well, who are number one?" She said, "Well, this may surprise you. It's the American Indians." "Oh," and he said, "Well, who was number two? Who are the runners-up?" And she said, "Well, that's Jewish men." And she said, "Look, we've been chatting. We haven't introduced ourselves. My name is Julia. What's your name?" And he said, "Hiawatha Goldberg." You haven't heard that, have you? I must be honest. It was a Max Bygraves joke. Okay, so you look worried. You're Welsh, are you? You only came 15th. Never mind. Okay, well, look, the other well-known clarinet player in that era was, of course, Woody Herman. And I had the privilege of spending the afternoon with Woody Herman here in Perth before he played at the concert hall. The reason he was still playing at about my age, could be my problem, is when he had the big band doing the swing era, he never paid any tax. And the tax department in America took his Hollywood house from him. But he was still going around the world, and he was still playing, and he always had he had Harry Sweets Edison on trumpet, and Al Cohen on sax. Anyway, his big hit, of course, was The Golden Wedding. Okay, so the problem is, as you've looked around, we don't have Nigel on drums, unfortunately, so you're going to have to be the drum section, okay? You better lead this, Nigel. So I'm going to play The Golden Wedding, try and get that top note, and it's up to you to create a fantastic rhythm so that we can finish this session on a good high A. Okay, so here we go with Woody Herman's Golden Wedding. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you. John Healy on vocals and double bass, Tony on piano. We hope we see you again. Thank you very much. It's been a great audience.